Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of an insightful and compassionate 20-year-old son, Joey, who is launching into adulthood. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. I'm also a certified coach helping primarily adoptive parents. Joey and I are committed to helping anyone impacted by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. So listeners, do you or someone you know have parents who got divorced? Have you ever considered how divorce might affect adopted children with extra layers of complexity? Well, today's guest, Jane Spreckley, is an adoptee whose adoptive parents divorced when she was 14 years old. She'll talk today about how the divorce activated her abandonment issues, and she'll give us some ideas of how parents can do a better job navigating these very complex and difficult issues with their children. So thank you for being here on Unraveling Adoption, Jane. Glad we connected.
Thank you, Beth, for having me. This is great.
Yeah, of course. This is a great topic to talk about. I never see this talked about, really. Have you?
No, I have not.
Divorce in adoption?
No.
Maybe we're pioneers, and we adoptive parents need to become more aware of how divorce can affect people. So I'm looking forward to getting into that topic. But first, why don't you just give us a background of, how old were you when you were adopted? What was your childhood like?
Okay, I was adopted when I was 10 months old. My parents weren't able to have children, so I was adopted in 1963, a baby scoop era adoptee, same race. I was 10 months old, and I was in a foster home, actually 2 foster homes. And then at 10 months, I went home with my adoptive parents. About 18 months after I was adopted, my mom got pregnant. And that's so common. So I have an adoptive brother that's about 2 years younger than I. I had a wonderful childhood. I couldn't ask for better parents. We had such a great family life. We traveled a little bit, educational vacations and things like that. And my mom was very into spending time with us and sharing her knowledge of nature and things like that. It was just a wonderful, wonderful time in my life.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. And I am cognizant of the fact that even though wonderful parents, wonderful childhood, even though there's still pain from being adopted. So just acknowledging that. So that's the both and. You had wonderful parents and it was still just this pain. Did you realize that it was painful, or has that been a later discovery?
I did not. I always knew I was adopted. My mom always shared that. She told me as a young kid, they gave whatever information they were supposed to give age appropriate, and I knew my birth name at the time. I was probably 8 years old or something like that. But we didn't really talk about adoption. The only thing my mom would say once in a while was, if you ever want to search, I'll help you. And I never felt different. I always felt a part of their family. I looked a lot like them. So I didn't have that not looking like them thing. So it was, I felt like a part of them all my life. Right up until they died, I was their kid. So I never had that struggle.
Oh, that's so great. I'm glad that happens sometimes.
It does.
That's great. And that story does need to be told. It's not always horrible. There are certainly horrible stories out there, and people are happy to share those too. But I'm glad that there are people like you that say, I had a great childhood and they did the best they could. And I had great memories. And I think that's great. I hope that my son sometimes thinks that, no, there were some really good parts about my childhood, even though he's identified that the adoption also has caused pain. So when did your parents divorce? When you were 14, right?
I was 14 and my brother was 12. 14. Yes.
And was this a shock
yes.
or were you like, oh, finally?
Well, it sort of was in the way she did it. I don't want to make it sound like it was a total shock. My parents had argued and they had had struggles, and we went to therapy. They took us to a family therapy and never shared the fact that I was adopted, I don't think. So there was that.
You knew you were adopted, but the family therapist never knew adoption was in the mix.
Correct. And one of the things was that I tried to stop them from fighting because I just couldn't stand them fighting, and I would leave the room sometimes, or I would just say, knock it off. Why do you have to fight? Yeah. And so we knew that they weren't getting along, but they sat us down one time and my dad said, it may come a time where I have to look for an apartment or something like that, but you kids will always be welcome no matter what. So they shared with us that this was something that they were thinking about or processing through, or if it didn't work, they were going to separate. Okay. And then 4 months later, we were on our Christmas vacation and my brother and I were with our friends, And when my mom picked me up from my friend's house, she said, I took some things out of the house. I'm leaving your dad. And I just was like, I don't understand. What do you mean? And she said, I took some things out of the house and I'm not going to be able to live with your dad anymore. She wanted me to come with her. She said, will you come with me? And I said, no, this is my home. I'm not leaving my house. It wasn't about the person. It was about, I just don't want to leave my childhood home.
Yeah.
So when I got home, my dad was coming home as my mom was bringing me home. And my mom had pulled out of the driveway and my dad was there. And he said, what was the matter? And I said, Mom said she left. And he said, I know, I just saw her. And I said, no, she said she left. So we walked in the house together and my mom had left. She had taken the majority of the things out of our house.
Oh, and your dad didn't even know?
No, not that she was leaving like that. No.
What?
He went to work. Yeah. And so for us, it was a couple of days after Christmas and we were sitting there like not knowing what to do. So in that way, it was a shock. But in the other way, it was not so much of a shock. We knew that they weren't getting along.
Wow. Do you have a tough time every Christmas now because of that?
I do. I
bet.
I don't know how to explain it except for it's a feeling that I have and it's a build up to that day. Once that day is here, it's okay. Yeah. The day passes and it's okay. But I had a hard time with Christmas for a really long time after.
I bet. Shoot. And how was your dad when that happened? I'm sure he was also devastated, but was he available for you to help process that?
We were all there for each other because we were all in the same spot. I mean, he was angry. He was really angry and I didn't know how to help him. And being the good adoptee, you want to always help and you want to do the best you can. And I didn't know how to help him. So we learned how to help each other, I suppose. I had to start being an adult really fast because my brother was 12. My dad didn't have much experience with cooking or cleaning or things like that. And neither did I really, but we had to learn it together. And it turned out he stepped up and he was a really good dad.
Okay, good. It sounds very tricky. I mean, no matter how it happens, I'm sure it's tricky, but it sounds like that you guys at least didn't turn on each other.
Right.
And how was your mom, even though she's the one that left? Did you still have access to her? Did she help you through this too? Or
She did. She didn't talk to us for a week. She went to visit her parents and they lived in New England. She left and we didn't know where she was. And she called about a week later and it just so happened that I picked up the phone and she said, oh, I'm so glad it's you that's on the phone. And I said, well, where are you? Where did you go? Like, I was just like a devastated kid, where are you? And she said, I went to visit my grandparents. And I said, well, I just want you to know. And I had had a week to process this. And I said, at 14 years old, I said, Mom, I'm really upset and angry at you. I don't know what else to say except I forgive you. And she said, we'll make this work. And so I always had a relationship with her through the years.
Wow. That could have gone a couple of different ways. I could imagine you saying, I'm really angry at you. How dare you not at least let us know where you are? I don't want to talk to you again.
That's right.
But is that because you're a good adoptee, quote unquote?
I guess.
Or you really didn't want to lose her?
I didn't want to lose them. I loved them both. And I thought it's hard to think about your life separated. I guess now knowing all that I know about being separated from the first person that I was supposed to be with, I just never wanted to be separated from either one of them. And we had to have 2 Christmases and 2 celebrations of everything because they didn't get along at all.
Yeah, that's tough. And you mentioned being reminded about that first abandonment. That probably wasn't even on your radar at 14.
Nope.
But looking back, you realize your mother disappeared for a whole week.
Right.
That's kind of intense. Like, you don't know, did she kill herself? Like, did you think maybe she killed herself or she'd never, ever come back? Or did you figure she was blowing off steam?
I didn't know. I didn't really know.
Yeah.
I never thought about where she could go. I mean, I never thought she would go that far away. We live in Pennsylvania and my grandparents lived in New Hampshire. So it was a 6 or 7 hour drive.
Whoa.
And I didn't know. I thought maybe she would, but I thought she would call at least. And she didn't for a week. And I guess she just needed to calm down and let him calm down because my dad was really angry. I don't think he knew what to do. I think he was shocked and he said, we'll stick together. And the 3 of us talked about it. And we were always there for each other after she left.
Oh, wow. Now, when did you start putting the pieces together that you were extra affected because of your first abandonment? When did that start pulling into place?
Honestly, not until I found my birth families.
Okay.
Until I realized what issues comes from the primal wound.
Okay.
And honestly, I never wanted to search. I never had a need to search or wanted to search. And I got interested in it because of DNA. And I thought maybe I could find out what ethnicity I was. And I was just interested in that. And then once the interest was piqued, I thought, well, I'll get my original birth certificate and things like that. So I did all of that. And once all that fell into place and once I met biological relatives, I thought to myself, wow, I thought back on the whole abandonment thing because it's around the holidays when this all triggers. And so
yes.
I thought about that and I thought, wow, I guess I understand why now that it was so hard on me back then. And it didn't dawn on me till I was 60 years old. So I was probably 57 when I started the process of looking for people.
Oh, really recent. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't live my life wondering or worrying about the abandonment. I just thought it was tough on me. And a lot of my friends' parents got divorced after ours. Yeah. And so, I listened to them and we talked about it. But the reason that it was so difficult for me and not wanting to let go of my mom was it all came to a head, and I realized after a while that that's probably why.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And yeah, divorce is tough for every child, for sure, especially if it's unrecognized or unthought about. That other abandonment trigger is going to be big. How did that manifest for you? Like, did you have other relationship issues later on or other things that you can attribute to that feeling of abandonment?
Yes, I actually did. And it didn't dawn on me as I was going through it, but friends, not so much partners, but friends. If I made a friend, I wanted that friend to be a lifelong friend. And I never intended for it to be somebody that comes into your life for a season or so when the friendship fizzled out a little bit, I would get hurt. And I would think to myself, I wonder why this is. Like, why do I feel so intense about these friendships and my friends don't? And I was hurt a couple of times really badly by close friends that I thought more of. And it wasn't what they did. It was just my feelings inside that I was putting that out there. I was feeling that abandonment by them and it triggered it. And I didn't realize that that was exactly what it was.
That makes sense. You're holding on extra tight. And most people kind of flow in and out of friendships throughout their life. But yeah, that makes sense. You would hold on extra tight. Don't leave me. Don't leave me. Yeah. Or take it very personally. Did you take the divorce personally?
For a long time, I did, because when we were talking about it one time, my mom said something to the effect of, well, you caused it. And I just, I took that really, really personally, and I held on to that for a really long time. And then one time, a couple of years after that, we were talking about it. And I said, Mom, why did you blame me? Why did you say it was my fault? And she said, I never said that. And I said, well, you did. And that's what I heard. But can you explain to me, what does that mean?
Okay. She and your father were having trouble figuring out how to discipline you and disagreeing about that. Yes. So it was their fighting about you guys.
That's right.
That caused the breakup or their communication issues or whatever.
Yes.
But at 14 years old, you heard it. It's my fault.
Right.
Yeah. That's hard. Now, we have talked about this before, and maybe if people have really listened to our podcast, you will know that I divorced my son's dad when he was 4. So this topic is bringing up a lot of stuff for me. I feel very guilty and bad for the way I handled it. I don't regret divorcing that man, but I should have, could have, would have done it way differently now, knowing what I know now. And I wonder if you have any advice for adoptive parents that find there's no workable solution, they need to divorce or they're going to divorce, whether they need to or not. How could your parents have done this a little bit better?
I think that if my parents would have had the outlet to find a therapist specifically for an adoption competent therapist for me, I think that, and this is where I go back to, it's my fault. Because if they would have gotten me therapy with an adoption competent therapist, I could have maybe figured out what the issue was, why I was fighting so much with my brother, or why things were going bad. I was struggling. I had learning disability problems and I had attention problems. I had a hard time focusing in school. And I'm sure that all built up the whole thing of my brother and I fighting because he was a great student and I wasn't. And so it was hard for my parents to deal with both of us on 2 separate levels.
I bet. And it's super common, by the way, for adoptees to have ADHD or have learning disabilities or have these issues. And I bet you felt very compared with your brother and just like, oh, I can't I can't live up to this, like an unfair playing field here.
I did, and things came so easily to him. He didn't really study much, and he got A's and B's, and I couldn't focus enough to even get C's in school, and it was really hard for me. And trying to make friends and be that perfect kid that everybody liked, I struggled a really lot. I struggled a lot in middle school. Not so much in high school. I sort of got my, once my mom left, the house was a little more calm.
Oh, okay.
I did better. I still struggled with academics, but I did better.
Yeah, I bet your focus was able to improve. When things calmed down at home, you could focus and get stuff done.
A little bit better.
Yeah, I bet.
I think parents should just try to be, it's hard to say why they fight about those kinds of things, but I think the basic for me was just understanding adoptees better.
Yeah. Maybe the adoption trauma had something to do with why the kids were fighting.
Right.
Maybe they needed to treat you not exactly the same as your brother. Maybe you needed some other special something. I don't know what, especially therapy that would be addressing your adoption issues.
Right.
That is crucial. I didn't know that adoption competent therapy existed. I didn't know that my 4-year-old would have needed something, but certainly now, if I were to do this over again, he would have been in play therapy from like 2, I don't know, however young they take them, to work on some of these issues that are deeply, deeply entrenched. And the divorce did not help my son, for sure. For a couple of years there, he was just extremely acting out, getting in trouble at school, hitting kids, and which was tough on everybody. We're all just trying to make things work. And it was really, really, really tough. And I did not navigate that well. I think that, of course, I cared about him and I cared how he was being handled in this whole divorce mess, but I didn't consider the adoption at all. And yeah, I really regret that.
I mean, how would you? And honestly, back when I grew up in the 70s, you weren't allowed to talk about much of it. They were told to say certain things, and your kid was a blank slate. So why would they investigate the fact that you needed somebody that knew about adoption if you weren't treated that way? And there were good things about that. I was treated the same as my brother, but I was different, and I needed difference. I needed something else.
Yes. At least you weren't treated less than.
No.
But it should be different. It's like apples and oranges. They're not the same. They're not the same. Gosh, that's tough. What if my son is listening? He's 20, or a teenage type person that is going through this, that's an adoptee, that is listening to this, and their parents are fighting, or their parents are divorced, or whatever, somewhere in there. What advice would you have for them?
Let me think about that. I think I would just say to give them some compassion towards their situation and know that they struggle too. They're struggling and you're struggling because they're struggling. And just to give them some compassion towards the situation and try not to, for somebody that's 20 or 19, enough that they're having troubles too. And maybe you can come together and have a conversation or go to therapies together, or just keep an open communication. Tell them the truth. Tell your kids the truth, which is what made my life so much better, because my mom and dad always told me the truth about everything. They didn't hold back on certain things, and we knew that they were struggling, just maybe not the specifics of it, but we knew that they struggled. And I guess just keeping open communication would be the thing.
That's great. And the adoptee, to do your very best as much as possible to tell, especially after a certain age, to tell your parents, like, this is what this has been doing to me. And can we talk about this? Now, some parents might not be amenable to that, but if it's possible, that's good. I know my son has told me some hard truths that we've had to hold together. It's not easy, but I'm glad he's able to tell me, because then I can apologize, first of all, and learn and grow from his input. I mean, I think that's really important. And I think as we grow older, we're like, oh, we're all just making this up as we go along. It's like, parents don't know what they're doing. Kids think they do, but.
Well, I have one thing to say. There's no manual for parents that have biological children. And there certainly wasn't one for adoptees then, and now even. And young kids that parents go through, you think, oh, they'll be fine. They're young. And especially adoptees, they've had a trauma already. So they're being triggered by another trauma. And it's probably, I don't want to say worse, but it's hard. It's really, really hard on anybody that has to go through that at any age.
I'd say it's worse for adoptees. I'll say it.
No, right.
It's worse for adoptees.
I would think, yes.
Yeah. It is.
I
It's
do.
like they already had one abandonment. They already had one separation, and now you're making them do another one. Yeah. So lots and lots of compassion and compassion for all involved. This is just hard. Life is really hard for everyone. And to just try our best to focus on our kids and giving them the tools they need to get through. I'm so glad we decided to talk about this topic. And I know that it will help a lot of people. So people maybe will be more mindful about their kids before, during, after divorce, and just keep those lines of communication open. I think that's excellent advice.
I would say one more thing.
Mhm.
Just be compassionate to yourself too. Don't be so hard on you. You feel guilty and you feel bad, but it was what you had at the time. It's the tools that you had to deal with it at the time. So give yourself a break and be kind to yourself too.
Thank you, Jane. I will try to do that. I try to say, you can't know what you don't know.
Right.
And I'm trying to remedy it by talking about this kind of stuff in public so other people can learn from me. So I hope that helps other people. Well, thank you so much, Jane. If people wanted to talk to you about this or get to know you better, is there a way you would like to interact with people?
Well, I'm on social media. I have a Facebook. I haven't really reached out and done much. So I'm just starting to get out there. So
okay. Is it just Jane Spreckley on Facebook?
Yes.
You're the only one?
Yes.
Yay. Yay for unusual names.
You could put my email in there.
Okay. What's your email address? And I'll put it in the notes too.
It's spreck529@verizon.net.
Okay, very good. I'll type that in the notes in case people are driving right now. Well, great. Well, everybody, I hope you learned a lot from today's talk with Jane, and reach out to her and maybe even just to give her some support and say thank you for sharing. And go look up Unraveling Adoption at unravelingadoption.com. And we have tons of events and ways to get engaged with the community on our website. So I hope you dig into our resources there. And I want to give a big shout out to all of our wonderful Patreon supporters who contribute $5, $10, or $25 a month to help us keep this podcast afloat and all the other free resources that we provide the community. If you're not familiar, podcasts are not free to produce. I have to pay for the software to make it, the software to distribute it, the mailing list, and all sorts of other things. So the Patreon support really helps us. And I really appreciate all of you who have supported us in the past and are doing so currently. If anyone would like to join Patreon, it's very easy to do. Just go to patreon.com/unravelingadoption. All the tiers are actually exactly the same. You get a shout out on the podcast, 50% off live events, early podcast releases, access to our new Adoption on Screen movie database, and more special goodies. And you can get it for any level of support. Thank you again, all our Patreon supporters. Make sure and share this episode with anyone you know. Maybe you know some adoptive parents that are going through divorce or thinking about it, and this is a good message for them to hear. So they can't say, oh, I didn't know. Now they can know. They can know and try to do better. So thanks everyone for listening. Jane and I want you all to stay safe.